You are listening to the AOTA podcast. Here is your host, Matt Brandenburg.
All right, welcome to the show, and a special shout out today to my mother and to my granny. I know you two are listening. I appreciate your support, and I love you dearly. Today we are joined by Kira McNair and Cassie Boyd to discuss their expertise in supporting individuals with spinal cord injury and the True Grit program. Kira, Cassie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I've really enjoyed getting to learn a bit about your involvement in the True Grit program as we prepared for this interview. And I want to introduce both of you to our listeners. What motivated you to really focus your professional efforts on working with individuals who have spinal cord injury?
So for me, one of the first people I worked with at Children's Specialized Hospital was a teenager with a spinal cord injury. And he's now, which is very full circle for me, one of our peer mentors in the True Grit program. His name's Adrian Lanza. But being a part of his team, I saw the reality of really the destruction this injury causes for not only someone's body, but also their spirit. And he plays the guitar, and we were nearing the end of his admission, and he mentioned to me how disappointing it was for him that he wouldn't be able to hold his guitar outside of his wheelchair. And he's resilient in his own right, but I had this opportunity to convince him that he could and that we needed to try. And seeing him just find the courage to put all of those pieces together we had been working so hard on, that his team had been working so hard on in terms of lower extremity management, the transfer, the balance, all of those pieces to get out on the mat. And I just handed him his guitar, and he started playing and singing the song Hallelujah. And the whole gym was just in awe of him. And it was just like this piece of someone's spirit was healed right in front of my eyes. And I just knew that that's why I became an OT. And I wanted to be part of fostering that feeling for this population.
I haven't heard that story, Cassie. I love it. I think mine's very similar. I was a level 2 fieldwork student, and I ended up being placed on the spinal cord injury floor in inpatient rehab at Rancho Los Amigos in LA. And I hadn't really thought about what floor I wanted to be on prior. And then when I went out there, I found that I really had this kind of calling to working with this population. I felt like, unlike some of the other work that I had done and other field works, it felt like I could really make such a significant impact on my patients in such a short period of time. I think sustaining a spinal cord injury causes this significant life change in a way that a lot of other things don't. It's just this abrupt change, especially for a lot of people who live really active lifestyles. And a lot of times OT can help obviously get someone back to participation in meaningful occupation, but a lot of times it's more of exploring occupations that they never really had considered previously. And I just think it's this unique space that we get to be in. And so for me, I only sought out really adult practice settings. And so I worked in adult spinal cord injury rehab, but I did find that over time, I had a lot of the young adult and teenage population, and similar to Cassie, we saw a lot of the same things. And so when I was able to eventually connect with her over this project, it was really interesting how much of our experiences kind of were very in line, which is why, a lot of development of this project was based on that kind of similar mission.
That's beautiful. You're both exemplary clinicians and OT providers. I really admire and respect your approach to care and this True Grit program that you reference there, Kira. Can you introduce us to that program? What is True Grit and who does it serve?
Yeah, happy to. So True Grit is a community-based program developed for young adults with spinal cord injury. So specifically, what we're looking at is between 16 and 21 for most of our programs, but for kind of the overarching umbrella is between actually 14 and 23, according to kind of the literature on the transition for this population. And our mission is to provide hope, healing, and inspiration to adolescents and young adults with spinal cord injuries. Our big focus is to support support them in the transition to adulthood. This is a really significant gap in services that are provided, and it's something that we specifically target through this kind of community-minded approach. Right now, we do it through two different mechanisms. So we host single-day events, such as a surfing day or a sports clinic. And then the second is probably the majority of what we'll talk about today is our residential summer camp. So we host a sleepaway camp at the Rutgers University Livingston campus in central New Jersey, where individuals come from all over the country and stay overnight in the dorms with support of us and some of our Rutgers students. And they're able to work on these transition level goals in this supportive environment. And so that program itself, we have things like peer mentorship, goal-directed therapy, vocational exploration, leisure participation and exploration. And then we also look at exploring higher education options, right? So both on the academic side, but then housing considerations, right? What would it look like for me to stay in a dorm and attend university?
What inspired you two to connect and collaborate in the development of the True Grit program?
So I had been in inpatient rehabilitation for many years working with this population, and I quickly learned experiencing a spinal cord injury is life-changing at any age, but like Kira touched on, for teenagers, it's just so especially challenging. Developmentally, they're pushing for more independence, figuring out who they are, who they're becoming, and then suddenly they're faced with this reality and just the psychological toll it takes and its impact on motivation during a limited stay. It just, all of us who work with this population just could see that it just significantly impacts outcomes. And when you haven't had time to accept what has happened, it's hard to fully commit to learning a completely new way to do almost everything, especially bowel and bladder management. And then on top of that, after discharge, there's just this severe lack of accessible expert level care across the country. And as a result, it just, it leaves teens and their families alone to navigate this journey. And there's just such a mountain of challenges, issues with returning to school and work and community reintegration, aging with this injury, complex questions about intimacy, sexuality, and there's just becomes no one to turn to. So I went back and got my post-professional doctorate focusing on program development and developed the True Grit program, the bones of what it was going to be. And just, in knowing that these injuries don't affect a teen's life today, it impacts their entire future. And we needed a way to support them just the whole time. We just didn't want them to ever feel alone again. So since that kind of program didn't exist, we created it. I eventually reached out to Rutgers to see, I knew that this model would really only be successful if we partnered with a university. And then that's how I teamed up with Kira McNair.
That is so inspiring. I think the occupational therapy perspective is so important in healthcare, in addressing needs that, as you mentioned, sometimes go overlooked and unaddressed for certain people. And I want to catch our listeners a little bit up to speed. You've mentioned some of the unique challenges that individuals with spinal cord injury face in community reintegration and daily life. How do these challenges really impact physical, emotional, and social well-being?
Yeah, almost how does it not, right? And there's just this lack of peer support that impacts the confidence of all of it. Most teens won't have met anyone else with a spinal cord injury, so there isn't a model for them to look to for reintegration. And it just becomes this isolation and this feeling that no one understands because they don't. And the most challenging part of daily life, in my opinion, are all of those aspects people don't see beyond the wheelchair. So the time, the energy, and planning it takes to perform bowel and bladder management, the impact of spasms, the nerve pain. And it really, really results in this isolation.
And from your experiences in treating and developing this program, what additional gaps in services or resources motivated, collaborating and including community health partners and health systems in True Grit?
This gap that teens and families have is that there's no one to consistently turn to navigate becoming an adult with a spinal cord injury. So once they, and I don't really like this word, but once they plateau, for lack of a better word, in therapies, that support system, is no longer. And through creating True Grit, we're able to not only bump up that level of independence at camp if we think there's an achievable goal for function, but we're able to give them this test run of college and this idea that they can stay away from home with safety and support. And it's just as important for the family to practice that, letting their child have that experience and kind of giving them that freedom in a safe way. So pairing with Rutgers, which I can let Kira speak to more, is really the way that we were able to make that a reality.
We both were separate clinicians, right? And I think we were seeing a similar thing and seeing that in acute care, someone's injured, they have this significant traumatic injury, and then within a week, they get discharged to an inpatient rehab hospital, if they get discharged to an inpatient rehab hospital, right? And then inpatient rehab is really now completed in 2 months, right? Sometimes you have as much as 3 months, but a really short period of time for this significant life change. So a lot of the education that they get or their families get in the inpatient side, there's only so much you can learn in that short period of time when you're also navigating this significant change in your life, right? And so one thing that we both have noticed, and I know a lot of spinal cord clinicians all over the country see this, is what we do see is a lot of our patients discharge home, but then end up back in the hospital and end up maybe having these really complicated trajectories where they end up in a long-term care facility for a little while, or they end up in a subacute, or they maybe are in the ER every couple of weeks because they have UTIs or have autonomic dysreflexia, right? All of these things that we would like to be able to manage and successfully hand somebody off back into the home setting are really hard in this complex diagnosis in particular. And so the typical care pattern, which would be that they go to inpatient rehab, discharge home, and then have skilled outpatient services, doesn't exist as much for our spinal cord population because there are very few expert clinicians in spinal cord injury rehab in your local outpatient center, right? And so a lot of people can't travel all the way back to where they did inpatient rehab to get their outpatient services. And some of them may not have coverage for outpatient services because they aren't able to demonstrate significant improvement in things like strength and endurance, right? And some of those outcome measures or quantifiable outcome measures that insurance wants to see. And so they just really don't get any services. And that's the bigger piece that we're looking at here, is how can we strategically fill all of those gaps for this specific population and support those young adults who may have had the best expert care, but that expert care falls off after 6 months. But then also we have young adults who really haven't seen a single expert throughout their whole journey and never even made it to outpatient rehab, right? And how can we support kind of both of those things at the same time through this lens of health equity?
I love that. I think that is so important and a really creative solution to this problem of inaccessibility that can be experienced by so many within the healthcare system. It sounds like the core goals of True Grit are really to help empower people to take control of their own health, to, learn how to establish a support system. Are there other core goals of the True Grit program that you'd like to lay out for us now?
The biggest thing is we're really trying to create this kind of comprehensive pathway for young adults to support them throughout the transition to adulthood to the point where they don't need us anymore, is kind of how we phrase it. And in the end, really empower them to live their lives as full as possible and be able to decrease things like secondary health complications and other things that individuals who are younger when they're injured are at higher risk of having these different things come up over time. And so our big goal is to get them out in the world and living their lives to the fullest as much as possible. And with that, offset the rehospitalization rates and the secondary health complications that are associated with this group.
We say in the program, you can break but not be broken. And I think it kind of just sums up our goal for the program, that you can have hope for continued recovery, but you can love yourself today and you can still have a hopeful future and kind of return to that mindset that you had prior to your injury of looking forward.
That's such an awesome goal of the program. I think it's very well designed. How do you really bring that to pass? Because that's kind of the second part of the equation. You have this wonderful program with excellent goals, filling a gap that's really needed for this population. Can you share some of the key components or activities that support participants' rehabilitation and community engagement?
When we were initially kind of looking at the framework for the program, we had thrown around a lot of different ideas, right? And looking at the literature, transition for this population includes some key areas. So that's things like education, returning to school, right? Being injured at 14, but a lot of our young adults maybe aren't returning to the classroom. They're still having class at home, right? So what does it look like to return back to the education space, enter the workforce, building intimate partnerships, and living independently? Those are really like the pillars of the transition to adulthood. And those may be changing, especially for some of our young adults who need physical assistance. That living independently piece might look different, but it still should be within reach, right? And so those are the things that we're specifically targeting in every aspect of the program. We had initially thought, we can do all these really fun things and exciting things. And then when we started to interview some of our participants who were coming in and applying last year, one of the things we identified was going to the extreme, right? So if we wanted to bring them kayaking, it would have been too much, right? Because their day is spent going to and from school, and that's about it. And for some of our youth, they're unable to get in and out of their houses. So they don't get out very much at all. So we really needed to integrate these activities that were both meaningful and empowering, but also feasible in their own lives and practical that they could be able to do once they went back home after camp was over. So some of the things we use, we have wonderful peer mentors like Cassie had spoken to. We have 3 peer mentors in our program, each of whom were injured in the young adult stage and are now living really fulfilling lives. We have individual therapy. So we have expert occupational therapists, physical therapists, recreation therapists on our team. We have psychology support. We do a lot of goal-directed interventions. So any participant coming into camp has at least one clear overarching goal they'd like for the week. And so we try to target those goals in particular. We also do things like vocational exploration. We work with the state of New Jersey's Office of Vocational Rehab, but we also integrate resources from other states because we do have participants who come from all over the country, and try to line up what would it look like for them to apply for vocational rehab support in their state, and what does that support look like. And then we also do some fun adapted leisure activities, leisure exploration, and those are often in line with what the participants are really interested in and giving them this opportunity to see what else is out there.
We hear all the time, like Kira mentioned, that these kids don't return to high school often due to the challenges. And it just becomes this hole that gets deeper as time goes on, as, your graduating class moves on and you just haven't. And I think the way that we design True Grit, it's become a second chance to pave a different way forward out of that hole when you can look around and see others with the same challenges. And like I've mentioned earlier, it's just there isn't another model where that team that's now yours, it doesn't go away like the traditional models. Like we're when camp's over, they're still in True Grit. Like, we're still there to talk to them and their family and advocate for them about accessibility needs in college, for example, or to go over the vocational rehabilitation papers with them. Like, we're their team always for as long as they need us.
That's awesome. It's such a robust program. It sounds like such a wonderful team with collaboration across fields. Why do you feel it's so important to have a community-based approach in spinal cord injury rehabilitation and the True Grit program?
Community-based approach is the past, present, and future of occupational therapy, but I won't go too in detail about that. I really think for us, it's just, we are in the right context, right? It's for, as occupational therapy practitioners, like, why not work in the space that people are going to be living their lives, right? And so there are really very few programs specifically for this population that happen in the community. And those that do exist, which is actually something we considered when we were looking at our model, are very medically focused, but they do create this space. And so there's an organization in New Jersey called Project Walk. There's a few of similar organizations throughout the country where a lot of our actual participants go there and they do, physical activity, but they also go quite frequently to be in this space of community with one another, right? And have this like-minded goal of, improving strength, right? But a lot of what currently does exist are these things that are really more of a gym-based activity, right? And the goal being improving strength or function, but not necessarily addressing some of the barriers towards community participation. So for us, by offering this intervention in the community space on a college campus, we can address supporting those barriers in real time. So, some of our participants couldn't visualize themselves living and going to college. By coming to Rutgers, which isn't the most wonderfully accessible campus on the planet, but we do a pretty good job. And by coming and feeling that sense of freedom in the space that, on campus, and being able to navigate the dorm room and being able to get over to the dining hall and get their meal in the dining hall, so many of them had this like aha moment of like, I could really do this. I can see myself being able to go to college or live independently or get around without someone needing to help me with everything. So we were really able to problem solve in the moment. And so that they know they're not alone in navigating these challenges that will inevitably come up as they continue to experience their lives.
I love that. Thank you, Kiera. I love your perspective on community intervention being the past, present, and future of OT. And it sounds so well applied through True Grit. And a shout out to all the Scarlet Knights out there at Rutgers. How have you both seen the program evolve since its inception to fully meet participant needs?
I think as the program has evolved, our partnership between Children's Specialized Hospital and Rutgers has also grown and evolved, and it continues to do so in a positive way. But we first started by hosting day events. So we had our beach day, a wheelchair sports day, and we always knew that our goal was to run this camp. And in starting this venture, I always felt strongly that this second chance of therapy idea at camp was the most important piece. And I just quickly realized that it's not. It's more of the community that we built that's the most important. It is the peer support. It's this sense of this robust team. And the most powerful part of our program, I think, has been to evolve to foster that.
I love that. You have both already shared some wonderful applications and strategies within the program, such as learning to navigate a college campus, establishing friendships and a sense of community. What other strategies have you found effective in helping to foster independence and confidence through True Grit?
We're really thoughtful going into camp. It was really just giving our participants the opportunity to problem solve, right? To maybe struggle in the moment. The thing that we do really well in the inpatient setting, but then they go home and, mom doesn't have time to let them struggle to get their shoes on. So mom helps them, right? And so in this camp environment, we gave them that little bit more time and that little bit more of that opportunity to thrive. One thing that I found interesting of a finding was that what we did in the program is we actually paired our OTD students and one of our DPT students with our participants as kind of like a one-to-one care attendant as needed. And that actually ended up being so helpful because the students, they're not experts in spinal cord rehab, right? And that wasn't the expectation, but they were able to work as a team when they were, hitting any challenges. And so instead of me and Cassie being the ones providing the one-to-one support where we might be cueing them too much, the students were able to kind of say, hey, it doesn't seem like this is working here. How about we try it this way? And find these unique ways of figuring out how to navigate the problem. And our participants really felt that teamwork, right? So they really loved that experience of working with our OTD students and what we call them our youth support specialists. And they really felt like they had this partner that they could problem solve with. And obviously that helped the students learning as well. But it created this space where the participant could also be the leader and advocate for themselves and say, hey, no, that's not how my wheelchair needs to be set up. Or can you help me grab this other thing from this angle? This is more helpful for me than that. And they need to learn how to advocate for themselves, but they're also not often given that opportunity. One of the best examples of this is our first day at camp. One of our campers wanted to get back in bed and lay down for a little bit in the middle of the afternoon. And so one of the students brought him back to the room and he got into his room and the door locked after she left the room. The student helped him get back in bed. She walked out of the room and then the door locked. And so the student called in a panic and said, he's never been able to transfer himself independently. We need the master key. And I was able to talk with the student and say, let's give him a chance to see how he might problem solve. And it was actually the first time since his injury that he transferred himself independently. And he was so proud of himself that he was able to transfer and get over and open the door as if it was no big deal. And then it's something that now he does consistently months and months later. But by putting him in this scenario where he kind of had to thrive and show his resilience, it really allowed him to push himself to the next level.
Wow, that is such an awesome story from the program. And that was on day one,
Yes.
Having that opportunity to thrive. Cassie, did you want to add anything on to that question?
There's this idea that, I would like to go to college, but how can I? And it's just this opportunity to try and to see what that would be like. And I can remember going into the dining hall the first day with everybody and just the look of terror on the campers' faces, just how much it was to navigate that environment and get their tray. And some of them came dependent, feeding themselves. And just by putting them in a position that was outside of their comfort zone and watching their growth over the week. I mean, the last time we were in the dining hall, it was just a group of teens hanging out, having lunch. It wasn't this, fearful group that had gone in the first day, and everyone left feeding themselves with independence. And it's just this shift that you can't get to without being outside of your comfort zone.
I love that. True Grit, it sounds like such a creative and practical way to address accessibility and inclusion by providing these opportunities to thrive. How do you recommend practitioners in other settings could really address accessibility and inclusion in a similar way? Or what can therapists and practitioners do to ensure that participants feel supported?
This is something that was really important to us from the very beginning, and making sure that everyone involved had a similar mission in mind, right? And knowing how we have these shared professional and even personal goals was really, really important to us. And then for us, at least, one of the key skills we're looking for in any staff in the program and any any of our students is interpersonal skills. So we tell them all the time, you don't have to be an expert in spinal cord injury rehab, but you do need to be an expert in talking to a 16-year-old boy. And so that's really the more important thing to us, is that you need to be able to support someone from a diverse background and be able to have those interpersonal skills to connect. And there sometimes is no one more challenging to connect with than a 16 or 17-year-old boy. And so it really allows us to find the right people who fit to work with that population. But I'd say for most practitioners, it's really not being the teacher is the most important thing for me as a spinal cord injury clinician. I found out really early on that I need to stop telling someone what they should be doing. I will always remember one of my first patients when I was on field work. I was really trying to encourage him to do something, and he said, "Stop. Maybe I don't want to do that anymore. I'm using this experience as an opportunity to decide what else is meaningful right now, right? And I don't want to go back to that job because I didn't really like it. So let me figure this out and let me, decide what my next step is." And that's something that I think is really important for, a therapist that's going to be working with an individual with SCI, is not imparting our own perception of kind of wellness or what life should look like for them, and really allowing them the voice to decide what their goals are and what would be meaningful for them. And that's definitely something that we embody in the program, but we also try to instill in the students who are involved in the program as they're going to be entering the workforce as well.
That's such an important aspect of occupational therapy care, is having that cultural and contextual humility. And I love that it's emphasized and encouraged and instructed throughout this program. What are some of the impactful moments and success stories that you've witnessed as part of this program and as part of this person-centered and opportunity-focused approach?
One of our participants from last summer's program, after he came to camp, he gained the confidence to attend college, and he's in college now, and he credits True Grit for that shift in perspective that, he doesn't have to just exist. He can live and he can aim for goals and go after what he wants. And I think something that we've now come to understand too is that how important that is for the family to also, have that experience that they can. And it really just creates this unstoppable force for them. We have other kids that since attending are applying to college who otherwise wouldn't. Kids feeding themselves independently who weren't, transferring themselves, just being teenagers, going out with their friends again, doing the more things that we would consider simple that aren't for them. Seeing the kids that came to us, and they all just have such a bright light. And I think our biggest success is that they are reminded of that, and that the world gets to have them back in it, doing the things that make them them.
That's beautiful. And the world truly is a better place for that outcome of this program. Kira, are there any examples or stories you'd like to share as well?
I'd say the thing that I'm the most proud of is how the students came out of this. So we had 2 students who actually, the program development was their capstone project. So for their last spring, for their capstone, they both worked really closely, obviously, with myself and Cassie and with the team at Children Specialized. And they were boots on the ground across the Rutgers campus, knocking on doors and figuring out which dorm rooms were most accessible. And really just very engaged in development of the program. And as we all know, the capstone is a lot, right? And so the students spent the 14 weeks doing this. And then when it came to that camp that summer, they both came back and volunteered their time to the point where like we needed to send them home at the end of the day. They were just so excited and passionate about this population. And now they're, working jobs that are supporting this population and are returning again this upcoming summer. And we can actually, have them support from a clinical education space and from a clinician space, right? And now we are really creating the new workforce out there, and they're just so incredibly passionate. That's always something that, obviously I'm passionate about this, Cassie's passionate about this, but you can't force the passion. And so it was really amazing to see them just become leaders in this space. And I really hope to continue to inspire that out of our students who are involved, and then some of the clinicians that we are now also trying to get involved in the program.
I love it. That passion is contagious, and it comes from a well-organized and program like True Grit. What role would you say that collaboration with other healthcare providers, community partners, and families play in the success of True Grit?
Yeah, I don't think we would be the program we are without our community partners. It became very clear to us that those who had similar missions as us were prepared to help us in any way they could. We, receive sport chairs to use from the Wheelchair Sports Federation. We have a beach day supported by Operation Beachhead, and the list goes on. And I think it goes back to those that understand and have seen the obstacles this population faces and the lack of resources they have. They are excited to partner with us to fill that gap. And we wouldn't be True Grit without them. And, our collaboration with healthcare providers is also so crucial. We're involving multiple disciplines at Rutgers. We have our whole children's specialized hospital multidisciplinary team involved, and we're continuing to build a referral network around the state so we can identify kids that need us. And obviously our families. I mean, just that they trusted us with their kids to drop them off for the first time. We all do it as a team together.
Yeah, this would be my pitch for OTs out there to kind of put their networking hat on. And like one example is we wanted to do a hand cycling day at camp, but we didn't know yet where we were going to get those hand cycles. And so Cassie and I actually volunteered for an adapted skating event in Manhattan last spring. And we noticed that there was an organization there that was supporting people with hand cycling. And so we, during the event, walked over to the gentleman who was running it and said, hey, what would it take to bring these hand cycles over the bridge and down to central New Jersey in a couple of weeks? And they were thrilled, right? It was a like-minded organization, and it's Achilles International is the organization. And we just actually connected with them again about coming back this summer. And they're like, yep, tell us when, where, what, who, and we'll be there. So I think it just encourages you, if you are in this space where you're considering what your role is in communities and with populations, to really build on your network and, start to think outside of the box about how you can connect with some of these like-minded organizations and nonprofits.
That's such a wonderful example. I think the work that you both do really shows how OT can address health equity and can expand the scope of OT and the practice of OT to lead to improved communities and improved accessibility to services. But sometimes it's up to individual clinicians to act and to take those opportunities to thrive and network and make those connections. What are some recommendations you would give to clinicians or students to develop that type of focus in being able to expand the scope of OT and address health equity in this type of way?
I would just say, in the same way that we're promoting individuals to build their own interpersonal skills on the client level and on the interprofessional practice level, we should be considering that same skill set, right, in communities and populations. And I have a strong vision for, our future of capstone projects to be doing that, where we're, pushing students into this space before they graduate to see what it would look like to be a leader and to have more of an organization level lens. But I think just continuing to have a seat at the table is the most important thing. So if you're an occupational therapist in a hospital setting and you have the opportunity to be on a program team or to be on a committee, do it. Even if it's at lunchtime, show up and just make sure OT has a seat at the table. I think that more than anything gets you to start to test out that skill, right? And it is a practice skill to learn kind of when can I jump in and what would my role look like here. But I think I really want to encourage the general OT clinician out there to feel comfortable, shifting into that space more than ever.
I love that. Thank you, Kira. You both have really explained and illustrated how True Grit can fill some of the current gaps in the healthcare landscape. How do you hope True Grit continues to address health equity and promote more inclusive care for individuals with spinal cord injury?
The number one thing that was the most important for us, and it was something that we really talked through early on, is that we want to continue to offer this program at little to no cost to our participants. We don't want costs to be a reason that someone can't come, and we foresee that it would be a barrier towards being able to attend. And so we really reflected on our own personal and professional goals to determine kind of what do we want to do here, right? And what would that look like? And so that was part of the reason why it was really important that we had this academic and hospital system partnership so that we can find creative ways to serve our population without having them have to pay out of pocket. So that was really step one. The other thing is really being thoughtful about how we recruit participants, right? And we wanted to connect with individuals who were truly in need. So we worked a lot with health systems at first and a lot of the spinal cord injury model systems. And I'm very active in the American Spinal Injury Association. And so connecting within my own network. But then one thing that Cassie did that was just so important was being able to connect with the Spinal Cord Injury Peer Support Network on Facebook and some of these platforms, these virtual platforms, and be able to get a wider reach to individuals from all over the country. And what we really have found that those in more rural parts of the country have limited access to any level of expert care. And so we have individuals who came last summer from Tennessee, from Massachusetts. And then this upcoming summer, we have people coming from Kansas, from Virginia. So clearly, there was a gap there that we tapped into. I don't know how intentional we were initially with it, but it's definitely something that we've jumped into now since. And it's something that we're continuing to consider. We've been starting to partner more with some of our level 1 trauma centers in the local area to find out, are there any young adults that are maybe not even going to rehab, right? Or what does the accessibility look like for them for the initial referral to these networks? I work really closely with the team at the Kessler Foundation, where they run a pretty new program where they follow individuals from the trauma hospital to rehab and to home. And so we've been connected with them that we could be kind of one of the resources to support. But we're always being really strategic about what it looks like to actually widen our reach and support our participants where they are and in the communities that they're going to be living in.
I love that. Are there recommendations that you would give for other OT practitioners who may be interested in building similar collaborations with academic or hospital partnerships?
Yeah, so I would say first, to be passionate, see what needs to be fixed and fix it. And I think the biggest piece of that is being able to then surround yourself with people that share your passion. I think in doing this for years, you had to quiet the noise of that will never work, or who would come, or, there was all of these that won't happen. And I think just being relentless in that, yes, it will. We had so many doors closed on us, and we just would bang them down and find a way. And I think that in doing this, that's become a lot of people's impression of me, that I wasn't going to stop. And if anyone knows Kira, they would say the same thing about her. So we were able to find each other and then surround ourselves with our activity connection team from Children's Specialized Hospital and her compassionate doctoral students and the clinicians that work in this population that had been feeling this way for years, that there wasn't a way to do enough. And we found them to come. And together, I think we just became a force. And that's what you really need. You need to find those people that match your passion for fixing something.
I love that. You both truly embody the namesake of your program and having true grit and knocking the door down, as you say, Cassie. What role would you say research, including your dissertation work, what role does that play in shaping the program and advancing broader conversations around spinal cord injury care and community reintegration?
I transitioned into academia a little over 2 years ago, and I had started a PhD program actually before the transition and was really focused on, continuing to build on some of the clinical research I'd been doing in health systems. And when this program came out and it was something that I was starting to become more into a leadership role within the program, I thought this is something we can't just let it happen and not start to collect some data, right? This is so new and so different than what's out there. We need to collect some information. We need to build upon it. And so I started to really work hard on figuring out some, program evaluation models and implementation science models, and figure out kind of what do we need to do first in our pilot phase, which was last summer, and then how do we expand on that? So last summer we collected data mostly on just the individual level. So for all of our participants, we did interviews at the end of camp. We did some pre and post tests with them. And what we actually found, what was really interesting, is that our daily debrief sessions were really impactful, and they were able to build community and find this sense of belonging really early on in the program because of that vulnerability that happened in our debrief sessions. So in retrospect, I thought we should have recorded the debrief sessions, right? Like, how do we capture that in order to disseminate this and be able to really describe what is going on here and how are we, meeting the needs of this population. And so what we're doing now for this upcoming summer, which will be my dissertation work, is really looking from multiple perspectives. So from the perspective of program staff, from the participants, and then from their care partners, so their families, and finding out kind of what does the implementation of the program mean to them, and then what are the outcomes, both immediate outcomes and then some of the sustained outcomes, and some reflections on how has this impacted the transition to adulthood after the participants go back home and reintegrate back into their lives using these kind of big picture frameworks. So the framework we're using for this summer is RE-AIM and the PRISM framework to really look at the program from really the outside looking in and honing down from the organizational level all the way down to the individual level, so that if there's anything that we're missing, right, if there's a component there that we need to strengthen, we can capture that and continue to work on that. And for us, the important piece is creating this model, expanding the model, refining the model, and then building upon it, right? Because if our end goal is to create this comprehensive pathway for young adults, we need to make sure that what we're doing is actually meeting the need and continues to meet the need moving forward.
I love that. I love how you're using, research and data to continuously improve the program and also ensure that this program can be replicated and hopefully applied in other, environments and communities to bring about increased accessibility to services and increased outcomes for everyone involved. So I definitely want to invite our listeners to follow on that research and stay involved. And I'd definitely be interested in hearing some of those outcomes as some of this research does develop. What would you say are some of the biggest lessons you've learned through building and running True Grit?
I think for me, the biggest lessons were just how to create real change. This started out as my dream, and as it became other people's dreams, it became the capstone students' dreams, Kira's dream, and that's when it really, grew to what it is. And I think just seeing that, my goals had been initially so focused on the experience of the participants, and I was just so blown away during the week watching all the students grow and gain so much from their experience and their compassion and the relationships they built and developed with their camper and their confidence in spinal cord injury. And I think the biggest lesson for me was that we're also building this future workforce of spinal cord injury that is so needed.
I love that. And how about you, Kira? Do you want to add on to that question?
I had a lot of experience building programs in the hospital side. And so I thought that was difficult. In a hospital system, there's a lot of layers and there's a lot of times that you have to get people on board. And that actually, to me, was where I started with the data-driven decision-making piece, right? Where I would go into a committee meeting and say, hey, this is something that needs to happen. And someone would tell me, prove it, right? And so I think that was something that I brought here, was that what data do we need to share with the organizations that we work with? And what do we need to continue to collect? How do we prove it, right? How do we prove the need? And how do we prove our worth and the sustainability of this program and scalability of the program, right? For me, the biggest lesson was how that's different in this space, right? And how there are pieces that are similar in the hospital setting to the community or academic setting, but really, we were almost allowed a lot more autonomy to just grow and move and shift. And you're in the community, so you're not necessarily put in the same box that you are in the medical model, right? And so we had this really cool opportunity to push and keep pushing, right? And I think that was something I didn't expect. And that was one of my favorite parts of the program, was just to see this in real time sense of belonging and support, and watch my students in the dining hall, give someone this quick tip to make it easier to hold a fork. Like it was way more rewarding than I would have ever anticipated.
I love that. And I just want to thank you both for sharing your dreams, sharing your information, sharing your expertise with us today. This is so valuable for myself and our listeners. What additional advice would you give to OT practitioners looking to develop community-based programs and interventions?
My key piece of advice would be to start small. Obviously, stay, rooted in your community. And the other thing is kind of listen more than lead, right? I think one of the things that we really strive to do in the Rutgers OTD program is really embody this idea of community engaged practice. And so being able to partner with individuals with lived experience and with some of the experts in the space, and understand that you may not know everything, right? So get a really great team around you. And, Cassie had alluded to that. But one thing we did when we were developing the program initially is we went to a few different hospital systems and met with some of their therapy teams and said, hey, if you were going to develop a program for young adults, what would it look like? What are some of the gaps you're seeing? We met with our peer mentors multiple times as we were developing the program to be like, hey, is there anything missing here? Is there anything else you would have wanted? And we continue to engage with our participants, with our peers. We really tailor the program based on the interviews that we have with our incoming applicants. And so we're not trying to say, this is the one size fits all program for you. We're continuing to kind of adjust what our plan is based on the needs of our population. And so that's really, to me, the most important thing for a community-based occupational therapist is really this ongoing needs assessment cycle and creating the space for that in whatever practice setting you'll be working in.
And how about you, Cassie? What advice would you give to occupational therapy practitioners looking to develop similar community-based programs?
I think my advice would be building something that doesn't exist. You need to know that you'll have days that it feels like it won't happen, that, the last door maybe did close. And again, just being connected to your why and your purpose and what your calling is, and just holding on to that while you just continue to move forward and see it through.
I love that. Those are excellent recommendations, empowering pieces of advice. Has there been anything kind of unexpected or maybe an insight you've gained from your involvement with True Grit, maybe you didn't expect to gain, that practitioners could apply to their own work?
The most unexpected for me is that kind of once the train starts, it just keeps on going, and that we're now in this space that we do have more opportunities. We are able to share what we're doing, and that something just becomes so much larger in a positive way than you expect. And like for me, like I alluded to before, I'm now playing this role in educating these future clinicians, which has been so meaningful to me professionally, and something that I've loved so much and that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do without seeing this through.
And how about from you, Kira?
To me, it really pushed me. And it's interesting because in my own PhD program, I recently had a leadership course, and I was thinking about this and thinking of, the leadership roles that I've had as a clinician were really more informal roles, right? I developed a fellowship program, and so kind of served in that space for a while. I've led certain programs, but I was never like a manager or a leader in these spaces. And so I think being in this program, it let me kind of step into that leadership role in a new way, but obviously with such a supportive team. And it really let me, feel like I could be strong in this space. And so one thing that happened during the program is we had to make really quick decisions, right? We, the first day of camp, we had an individual who arrived and was medically unstable. And, being able as a group to come together as our leadership team and be able to make those quick decisions for the benefit of that individual. And it was really meaningful to feel like, no, we could do this, right? We could step into this leadership space, and we are very capable of it. And another time during camp, I got a call at the end of the night, and Cassie and one of our other team leaders had called to say, we think an individual might have developed a wound during the day. What should we do? Like, what's your recommendation in addition to this? And I'm thinking to myself, like, when did I become the medical director of the program, right? But I'm like, all right, I'm going to put my medical director hat on. I'm going to think about what's my rationalization around this. How can we problem solve as a group? But it was just so meaningful to have this supportive team and this leadership group around me that I feel like we could thrive really well. And I think that that's something that practitioners don't always get the opportunity to do in some of our current kind of medical spaces, that then when you can shift into these more volunteer positions or some of these community-based partnerships, it really pushes you kind of into more of this leadership role that I know for myself, it was something that I hadn't even considered as much. And now I think it was one of the areas that I really grew based on this program.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that lived experience with us. What would you say is next for True Grit? Are there exciting developments or expansions that you're looking forward to?
Always. This summer is going to be our second residential program, and we had initially targeted recruiting 9 participants. We ended up with 6 participants last year. So we had initially targeted recruiting 9, and we very quickly had a wait list. And so with our wonderful partnership and meeting with our Children's Specialized Hospital team, they really requested that we try to avoid the wait list as much as possible. And so we have been allowed to accept 12 participants. So we will have 12 young adults who are already interviewed and vetted and completed their applications. So we have individuals coming from Kansas, Virginia, Tennessee, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Jamaica, New York, and then, of course, New Jersey. We have 5 returning participants who were some of our participants from last year, and they're going to be shifting into more of a pre-peer mentor role, a role called a level 2 participant this summer, which we're really excited to see what that looks like. And then we will have 7 brand new participants. We're also really excited because we're going to be shifting from a 5-day model, which is what we ran last year, to a full week, which was something that our participants really wanted to see. So we're going to have a full week, which gives us a little bit more flexibility and more options to tailor some of the programming around the needs of our participants. So that's really our immediate exciting development. But in the meantime, we're working really closely with all of our partners to envision what it might look like to create more of an extended model of care and more intensive service delivery models. And I hopefully have a few capstone students considering to work on this next spring. So hopefully a lot more to come, in addition to us publishing our pilot data in the next couple weeks.
That is very exciting, and a testament to this wonderful program that it's growing, and there are these opportunities. Cassie, was there any other expansions or developments you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, whatever gaps we're identifying, we are going to try to continue to fill them. So this year it included, significantly expanding our reach of the amount of participants we were taking. But we know that there's more that needs to be done, that there's kids that we aren't necessarily able to find right now that need us. So continuing to strengthen our referral networks and problem solve whatever current gaps we face, we will continue to do.
I love that. How can listeners support your work or get involved with the True Grit program?
Yeah, so they can find our True Grit Spinal Cord Program information on the Children's Specialized Hospital website. And there's clinicians that are volunteering to gain more experience in this population. We have multiple one-day events throughout the year. Kira and I have served as mentors for clinicians that are wanting to learn more about this population. So they are encouraged to find us on the website and reach out in whatever way we can help them.
I love that. Was that a leaf blower I hear in the background there, Cassie?
It may be a leaf blower, Matt, that you hear.
That's okay. I do all these recordings just for my apartment, and sometimes I get leaf blowers in the background, garbage trucks, things like that. But just wanted to point it out to our listeners so they know what they may be hearing. So I want to be sure to include a link to your website in our episode description. Are there additional resources or maybe funding opportunities or communities that you would like to share with our listeners?
There are not a ton of resources for, OTs who are working with individuals with SCI. And that's something that we've connected with a lot of people about over the years. Actually, I gave a talk at AOTA Inspire last year on non-traumatic spinal cord injury, and I had a really big group there. And I said, like, what's everyone doing here? And I think a lot of people were really excited to see something about spinal cord injury at conference. So it's something that I'm going to continue to try to do. But for me, I have been a really active member in the American Spinal Injury Association, and it's definitely a wonderful organization where you can have access to, they have e-learning modules where you can learn some really wonderful information on the Asia classification scales and on, things related to bowel and bladder function for individuals with SCI and autonomic dysfunction. So some of the really gold standard education pieces, I would say, are on that site. And if you are an OT working specifically in the spinal cord injury space, I do encourage you to get involved in these organizations. I'm obviously a really active member in AOTA as well, but I really think it's important to be involved in more of our specialty organizations as well. And like I've always said, having OT a seat at the table, right? So I'm currently the vice chair of the education committee for the American Spinal Injury Association. And it's really nice to have OT representation in these committees and in these spaces, because I do think that we have a really important voice, specifically with this population. We also have a few upcoming presentations. We're going to be presenting at the American Spinal Injury Association conference in June, and also hopefully at the ASCIP conference in Philadelphia in the fall, in addition to being at Inspire this week. And then we also are hoping to publish some of this material coming up, but being able to look out for some of the literature that's been coming out in spinal cord injury rehab is really important as well. And I can share some of those, but you can connect with us at any point in time. You can follow us or find us on LinkedIn. And I often share quite a few spinal cord injury specific education opportunities and funding opportunities and learning opportunities on my social media pages.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. And well, thank you both so much for your time today. I just want to end with one final question to give you the opportunity to share one last piece of advice or one last take-home message with our listeners. What would you like to say?
Being connected to your own why and your own grit, and that will translate to helping clients, but also in building something bigger than yourself.
My hope is to encourage OTs who are feeling, maybe thwarted in the current medical space, right? Where I many times would have a patient where I just say, they're not ready to go home, or there's just so much more that I could be offering, right? To think back to the AOTA code of ethics and what our scope of practice is, and think, what else could I be offering here, right? How else can I support this individual in managing their condition? Because I'm not going to be with them, moving forward. How can I empower them? How can I promote resilience? How can I promote this grit in everything I do, in all of the ways that I'll be working with them? And then as I send them off, I will always remember a psychologist that I've worked with for many years. When I had a client who was a female 16-year-old girl with a spinal cord injury, and she was discharging home. And the psychologist said to me, "You better tell her goodbye. There's no see you later. You need her to know that you're not going to be, with her all the time." And it was upsetting, right? I didn't want to say goodbye. I wanted to say see you later. But I think that it's really important that we do what we can in the time that we have with people. But we need to be able to empower them. We need to give them those tools to navigate it without us. And so I encourage you, as OT clinicians, to think of what are the gaps that you can fill, and how can you empower your clients to navigate the inevitable barriers that are out there when you aren't there with them.
I love that. Kira, Cassie, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful speaking with you. I feel inspired. I feel empowered. And I am really excited to see the continued impact that you make with the True Grit program and in your professional practice. So thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to the AOTA podcast. Tune in again next time.